Hello and welcome to today's episode of Platinum Talks Wealth. Emmy-nominated journalist Jennifer Rogers Markwell changed gears in her television career when she realized the need to help women make sense of investing. She regularly hosts educational workshops to empower women and others to take charge of their financial future. Now, join your host, Platinum Wealth Management President Jennifer Rogers Markwell, as she leads us into the world of money memories, money infidelities, and how these can mold our relationship with our personal finances as adults. Let's dive into today's episode.
Hi, and thanks for spending some time with us. It's Jennifer Rogers Markwell, and you're joining us on the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Terry. And Terry, I'll have you introduce yourself and tell us all about you and why you do what you do.
Oh my goodness. All right. Yeah, I'm Terry Filipowicz. My entire life and world are about media and communication. So having these kinds of conversations is honestly a highlight of my day, possibly my week. Talking about ideas and concepts, and finding ways uh, to connect people with other people doing really cool things.
And I've had the pleasure of knowing you, and we were teasing for quite a long time, right? A couple decades in there. And we met actually at a TV station. So kind of rewind for me and tell me about what you were doing then and how you've evolved to where you are now.
Oh, well, because every interest I've had has kind of been around media and communication. In college, I wanted to study journalism. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to share narratives and learn about people. I actually had wanted to work in print, and there was a guest speaker in one of my classes who came to my college, and they worked at a TV station. And I was so taken by what they were talking about. And then also they were looking for volunteers who were going to actually be paid a small stipend for that night on election night. And I made the phone call. I went that one election night and I was hooked. So I actually spent most of my career in television news as a writer producer, but then also have worked in publishing. And I liked so much working with the students who came through the TV newsroom that I wanted to teach what I was doing at the TV station. So I went to graduate school, studied communication and media, not surprisingly, and then have also been working as faculty at a few different institutions.
Did you always know you wanted to do this when you were little?
I was 8 years old when I knew that I wanted to be a writer, and I wrote extremely bad, extremely poor poetry on little lined paper in my third grade classroom. So I knew I wanted to do something with writing, but I really didn't know until I was probably about 14 that I wanted to do journalism, that there was a particular industry that I could actually be doing this. I could actually be telling stories and working with other people who also like to tell stories. So yeah, I knew since at least 8 that I wanted to do something with words and do something with writing.
That's awesome. Well, you were such a great mentor back in the day, right? Like I remember just such fond memories of you being so kind and nice to all of the juniors that were in there and the interns. You were always so nice and kind and just so considerate and so thoughtful and took time out to help all of us.
I wanted everybody to be working together and using their different strengths and their skills to create something really cool. So, and I do like people, but yeah, we had a lot of fun in that place, early in our careers like that. So I feel really lucky, very blessed. I have a lot of gratitude. I'm very grateful for those times in my career. Absolutely.
I look at, and I would love your perspective on this too, because I look at journalistic standards now and TV stations and kind of how it was compared to how it is now. Do you see that big difference as well? And what are your thoughts?
I see the difference in fewer people doing more work. And I mentioned something about people's skills and their talents and creating a product. When you have let's say, a writer, and that person wants to be writing a story for news, but then you also have that person responsible for posting on social media, or they're not just, interviewing somebody and writing the story. They also have to shoot the video, edit the video, do something live for Facebook, etc. It's so many tasks now, and I think that it tends to water down the product. One person spread over multiple platforms, one person spread over multimedia. So that's one of the things that's happened in journalism. And oh my
Okay.
goodness, I could go on forever about what's shifted, because of social media, because of the 24-hour needs of cable that have kind of pushed local and national news in the direction that it's gone. But my goodness, that's like a whole other conversation and podcast.
That's so fascinating though, and I feel like I'm a little biased just because I remember growing up in a newsroom, right? I remember growing up and, from the very beginning, learning how to write and learning how to write VOSOTs and VOs and then growing up and becoming a reporter. But in a small market, like you did have to wear lots of hats. I was on call 24 hours a day. I did have a scanner next to my bed to hear whatever was blowing up in the community I lived in at the time. I had to, write and edit and go live on stories and which was a lot, but that was generally kind of the small market mentality. And now you're spot on because now you look at bigger markets and even like bigger networks and they're doing it all. They're one man banding in essence, where they're shooting their own stuff. They're going out, they're editing, they're doing lives for social media, then they're going lives for the newscast. And news has really transitioned from my perspective into it used to be a place where, oh, it's 5 o'clock. Like this is the time that we have to get our news right now. And we have a date and we're eating dinner on the table or we're watching it before we have dinner or whatever that looks like. But it was like you would go there at that time specifically to watch that newscast. And now it's 24 hours a day, anywhere you go, on your phone, wherever. So it's fascinating to me how it's evolved.
And that's another bit that's caused such the shift. So not just social media and not just the needs of cable television, but the audience wants the information. They want something and they want it now. We know this just when you think about how you order something from some mainstream website, right? It's not 2 weeks. You don't want it to be there in 2 weeks. You are expecting it to show up within 24 hours or 48 or 70. Like it's supposed to show up really quickly. So we've become so accustomed to having information and services and products net. Everything is fast food, but now everything is mass media, fast media.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so true. I mean, I think we've gotten spoiled in the days of Amazon where what do you mean it's going to take more than 3 days to be on my doorstep? Right. Which becomes dangerous too, I think, to a certain extent. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Fascinating catching up with you and kind of seeing you evolve from where you were. And I love that's one of the great things I think about social media, just from my own perspective, is kind of catching up with people and watching them evolve in career paths and things that they're doing. And obviously, I've changed from TV into finance and launched this podcast. And one of the things we like to talk about here are also money memories. So, what's a money memory that you had as a child or a younger person that helped evolve your relationship to money now as an adult?
This combination of saving but spending. And what I mean by that is uh, having the piggy bank. So and in my case, it was a little globe. I still have the globe. It was a little globe. And, you could put the coins into it. You had to really squeeze the paper money into it, but putting the coins into it. But also the comments from, let's say in this case, my mother, you can spend and not just save. So
Mm.
so for example, I was the kind of kid who after Halloween, I had one really amazing piece of candy I would save till almost Thanksgiving.
Just one.
Just one. But I would, because I was pacing myself. So I would eat a little bit of the candy throughout like 3 weeks. Whereas my sister, I just have one sibling, my sister would power through her pillowcase or her bucket or whatever it was for Halloween, right? Power through all of her candy and it would be gone in a blink of an eye. I saved mine. So that's actually really similar to how I have long viewed money. So how I dealt with money when I was a kid. So saving it, but then also consuming it at the same time. And we, meaning my sister and I, had an allowance, and our early allowances were connected to actually doing something productive. So we had what was called a chore chart. If you're looking at like, I don't know, say 11 years old, my sister would have been 8. Our chore chart had things like folding socks, unloading the dishwasher, might have been dusting, emptying the wastebasket, going to all the different rooms in the house, putting all the baskets into one particular larger container. And then we would go over and we would make the check marks or whatever it was on the chore chart. And then were rewards associated with that. So it was money. We also, I think, were able to choose stickers.
Nice.
But as time went on, it was more specifically about money. You can't spend stickers at the gas station when you're 17. So I had an allowance. I think my last allowance when I was 17 or 18, you're graduating from high school, might have been $8 per week. But it was amazing how much of that $8 I would save. Now, I was also really blessed, though, and I'm very grateful for this, that my parents had the means to be able to give me money when I needed it. So if I was doing something special, like I'm going to my senior ball, or I'm going to go out of town with my best friend and we're going to go with her family to, such and such city and spend the night, then my parents would give me money. And it was more often than not my mother who was kind of in charge, was the gatekeeper in terms of that. And so I didn't have to live entirely on the $8 per week. That was like fun money, but I was very blessed that my parents had the means to give me money when I needed it. But I saved that $8. And when I would receive checks, and they were paper checks, when I would receive checks, or sometimes cash from family members like grandparents or great grandparents, nearly every single penny of that went into a savings account. By the time by the time I met you personally, Jennifer Rogers Markwell, uh, I had a really huge savings account. But at the same time with that savings, I lived pretty frugally. Um, and thus it was, keeping the car for as long as I could keep the car until it broke down and just couldn't run anymore. But taking good care of it. It was always clean and well maintained, but eventually cars, they don't work anymore and they're too expensive to fix. But I would wait until that happened in order then to get another car, or, you know, renting someplace that was, no more than 25% of my income. So I'm going to make up a number. If my salary was, $6 million, then I'm just going to spend no more than 25% of that on rent each month. Of but I really, really wanted to have that savings account because that's like the security and the safety aspect. Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's my security and safety, is knowing that that was there. And certain rules, like you're supposed to have 3 months worth of salary saved up. Well, we all know that that's not the case anymore, right? Your 3 months is
Bare
nothing,
minimum. Bare
right?
minimum. Yeah.
It takes so much longer now to find, viable work with a great salary or benefits or, something. So, but I always had at least 3 months. And I did not I did not touch that.
That's so awesome. And I love that really that goes back to Halloween candy time and how you were dealing with that is a commodity in essence, right? And how you were managing that.
And sometimes it was a little too, it was a little too frugal, it was a little too tight. And this is where like my mother would make comments like, Terry, you can afford to go get a new pair of socks. Or, you don't have to buy the cheapest item on the shelf. You don't have to get the cheapest item on the menu. Uh, Sometimes I think there's almost something embedded in our DNA where it's like we'll have like this scarcity mindset because I did not grow up in an environment of scarcity. We always had plenty of food to eat. The electricity was always on. Again, I was very blessed, very grateful. So I don't know where this came from because it wasn't necessarily something that was taught to me. And my sister is nothing like it. Completely opposite in how she has long viewed money. And neither of my parents are necessarily like this. My my father having a very strong like work ethic, this idea of no matter what you are doing in your job, you treat that job like it's the most important one in the entire world. I mean, you give 100% to it. So that kind of view, I mean, maybe that's what partially affected the way I saw money. It's like, well, this restaurant job is the most important thing. I'm giving 60 million% to this. Therefore, I'm gonna like hold on to my money like I'm Scrooge, and I'm gonna sit there and count all these little coins every Friday night. But my mother would kind of push me, and she still does this to spend what I have and what I earn. So to kind of loosen up a little bit of that.
You are listening to the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
Hey, it's Jennifer. I wanted to take a quick break to remind you that you are worthy to have a seat at the table when it comes to money and your finances. We, both me and my team at Platinum Wealth Management, want to meet you where you are, whether you're starting out, starting over, or have been investing for years. Reach out to us at platinumwealth.net or call us at 775-717-0001. We'd be honored to help.
And now, back to the podcast.
My father has no comments about it, but my mother definitely does. I've had to learn to pull back from that scarcity mindset in order to have more lived experiences that do cost money. It was, in some ways, it's almost more
Specifically dollar amount then.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. And dependent on where I am. I mean, if I'm in a really super cool secondhand store and I make the sweep through and I see what the general cost is, and I see that generally shorts are, yes, $10 here. If I see a pair of shorts that's 20, more than likely I'm going to pass that pair of shorts by and go over to the ones that are still the $10 or less. If I'm in a high-end store, or I'm in a department store, mainstream department store, then I'm going to know, okay, this is what the cost is of this item here, and kind of put the base there. So it's kind of dependent on the
Fascinating.
situation and the place. But I think that has developed throughout adulthood, because that wasn't how I thought at age 25, but it is a way that I think about things now.
Do you find that now you have a better kind of integration of saving and spending?
Yes. But there's really fascinating priorities that all have that are not the same, I think, as maybe even mainstream society's concepts of what things to be valued. So, for example, I don't own a home anymore. I've owned 2 houses in the past when I was married, but I don't own now. I just rent. It boggles the minds of many a person, because how can I not see the value in owning real estate that then I could I could have that value increase. And so if I either A, sell that property, I receive profit, I guess, or B, that then that rent that have always been concerned of having 25% or less, then it would lock that in with a mortgage, right? I don't I don't see the like my value is different perhaps than others because I look at it as, all right, well, this is what my rent is. Oh, look, the light is out. Something's strange is going on with the water heater. And all I have to do is log into a website and put in a request, and somebody will pop up at my home and make those changes for me. I don't have to go around and shop and get the best value for a water heater or figure out who's going to replace it. So so looking at money and property, I'll look at it kind of that way, but I know that that's not how a lot of other people look at it because they tell me, "Why don't you buy? Why don't you buy? Why are you doing this?" Or why don't you live someplace that is more rent and things are newer? The microwave's not so old, or the carpet's newer, or it's hardwood floors, or there's something really trendy about it, something much more fashionable. I'm like, but I can keep the cost lower here and then not worry that I'm just going to drop several $100s and get on a plane and go off to another state. And I didn't have to spend hours trying to get the best deal, on that flight. I just found the one that's going to work the best for the people who are picking me up, and boom, there I can go.
Fascinating. So it's definitely specific depending on the situation for you, it sounds like.
Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Like I love talking to people on this podcast because everybody's perspective is so different, where they're coming from, what money memories they had, how they kind of evolved to who they are as an adult financially as well. So thank you for sharing.
No, no, absolutely, and an honor. I've just found that so many people are just so different with how they have relationships with money
Hmm.
that I can't begrudge people for doing something like every day I go to a coffee shop and spend on a particular drink. I d- I can't fault somebody for doing that because that's where they're getting, some type of pleasure from that. And I don't know what they are or are not doing with their money elsewhere. I mean, they may be like me. They may be dropping $8 for a fancy coffee drink, but then they're driving that car for decades until the thing falls apart, or they're managing their housing costs like I do in a certain way. That there might be some things I'm sure that I'm like, why would you spend money on that?
And I think everybody's so different, right? Like if that's creating joy for somebody along the way, but then they're cornering it somewhere else to be able to make that happen because that's a priority for them. I think that's looking at everything huge, big picture holistically, you know?
That's that's what I figure. That's what I figure. Uh, One of my weaknesses, though, still is, and I can bring this almost full circle by saying that I still have a habit of, s- you know, being like a squirrel and I'm hiding away that money.
Hmm.
So I'm still stuffing things into a savings account. So there are things that I'm not investing, because I don't have property. So I'm not investing in certain ways. I do have investments in some spaces and places, but there probably are things that I could be doing better than the equivalent of shoving money into a mattress so that it does grow for me. And so that, as time marches on, that there's more that I've gained from that chunk of change because of investments, right? Like my stocks, bonds, I don't know, whatever, but
Yep.
401ks or beyond IRAs that so things would be a little more robust for me. So that is one thing that I do have to work on uh, as an adult is being mature with my savings so that the money's working for me long term.
And the best that it can based on what your goals are. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. Exactly.
So another thing we chat through is financial infidelities, which you and I briefly talked about can mean different things to different people. What's a financial infidelity that you've either experienced or that you witnessed that you think others could learn from?
One of them, I know for a fact that my now ex-husband did not know how much money was in my savings account until we were buying our second home. Until we were buying a home. We had moved from one city to another city and we were going to be buying a house. And in order to do that, right, looking at the different finances that we had. And so he found out the amount of money that was in my savings account. He's like, "What?" And we're not talking $30 million here, but at the same time, we're talking maybe 30,000,
Sure.
right? And but it was my money because that was the money that, like I had, like I've talked about, was checks that I received from my great grandparents, in the 90s or something, right? And that was like I had such a base, and it plateaued. Like it was the sum was very flat. So I don't know if you can call that an infidelity, but I will say that I kept that savings account from him. It just was there since I was a kid. So I didn't see a need to be like, by the way, it's our wedding day. Here's how much money I have in my savings account. It just never really occurred to me. Uh, the only argument I could make is that if if you do have two people, then I suppose, right, who are looking at making some type of investment together. They are planning something huge. Maybe they have kids and they're looking at college, or they're looking at something for that child, or they're planning a big trip, their dream trip to Antarctica. I don't know. Then it probably would be beneficial for the other person to say, by the way, I've got this 30 grand in my savings account. You know, so, or I've had this 30 grand, but I really, really, this is really important to me that I have this. This is money I've had since I was 10 years old.
Mhm.
So I want to make sure that I continue to have this. This is just what I need for my mental and emotional health. Work with me on this. So that would probably be the one thing really that I can think of, is as being like a money infidelity.
You bring up a really good point on that too, because again, working with clients, right? That's what I do. But I see clients that sometimes keep it very separate in relationships, clients that have that conversation and are upfront and saying, hey, here's what I have. Where are we meeting? How much debt do you have? Like, what does this look like? Let's talk it through. But I think that your situation is somewhat common in essence, where, you've been doing your thing, like you were an adult when you got married, right? You already things had, going on in your world. And then you kind of met in the middle and you were just like, no, that came with me as I came along into this, relationship.
And that amount of money too, I think it's dependent on the amount of money. So I was not, a Rockefeller stepping into the relationship and saying, oh, by the way, I am a Rockefeller, here is that $30 million that I have. So that actually, I may see that as a little bit more egregious. So like, so if I did partner up and somebody walks into the relationship and I don't know they have $30 million, and then we're sitting around trying to pay the electric bill, I might be a little salty that they
Oh,
have
rightly
$30
so.
million.
And that's yeah. And that's where that prenup comes in ahead of time, right? When there's a conversation like that, right? That's where I always recommend, talk to somebody, figure it out. And in a perfect world, I think you should, right? If you're coming to the table with something and you're going into a partnership with somebody in a marriage, then yeah, you should have that conversation, a Rockefeller situation. And obviously probably a prenup would make really good sense. But everybody's situation is different for sure.
And I would also make the argument, one person's Rockefeller is one person's not. So 30 grand for somebody is a huge amount of money, 30 grand for somebody else. It's like,
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And again, that goes back to each person's financial situation is so different, right? For somebody that could be, a day's worth of work. For somebody else, that could be an annual times two. I mean, who knows?
and then also how we see the need or not see the need to combine resources, because some people would walk into a relationship and say, this is what I'm bringing to the table. Here's this money. We are now partners. What I have is yours. But then in my case, that wasn't immediately what I saw for that amount of money. But at the same time, I also had the same expectations for him. So with him walking into a more serious relationship like a marriage and combining those resources, I didn't expect him to empty his piggy bank and say, this is all yours. So I did not expect anything more or less than what I was willing to present.
I mean,
The validation.
again, if you went into it saying this is mine and everything you have is also mine, then obviously that's a different conversation, right? But if you're coming in saying, okay, what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine, and we'll meet in the middle.
The other scenario is very amusing. Here's my money. Give me yours too.
That is a thing. People, that is something that has happened and probably will continue to happen in certain situations.
I mean, I would argue that sometimes if I eat all of my French fries, I still want somebody else's French fries. That's something completely different. That lasts about, 10 minutes, not a potential lifetime of partnership.
Yeah. French
My
fries to
French fries are
dollars.
mine. Your French fries are also mine. That's
Totally.
funny. I like that. I'll do that, but money, totally different for me.
So as we, start to wrap up the conversation, one thing I like to ask is what are tips and or tricks that you use to utilize money differently in your own household?
One thing that I have, and it's actually sitting next to me as we're having this conversation, is I have a literal physical calendar, and I write on each day that something is due, meaning that a bill is due, and I write that amount, and I then see the trends throughout a year and know when more likely my costs are going to increase.
Hmm.
And because of my current job, which is faculty at a college, we we have a certain salary, but we have a 9-month contract. So our money is distributed within a certain period of time. So it's the same amount of money, but it's kind of like being a contract worker in some ways, because or you're working for yourself where, okay, maybe in March you're going to have a big, you're going to have a huge amount of money, but then in June you're not. So you know that that's going to possibly be happening. And so just for me emotionally and mentally, I know that that's going to be the case. So I'm going to have a paycheck that's going to hit at a certain time and date, but then I'm not going to have something for a couple months, but I really haven't lost that money. It's for me, it's potentially more psychological. Oh my goodness, there wasn't a paycheck. So just sort of mentally and emotionally preparing myself that that's going to be the case, but then there's going to be money that's going to be showing up later. So keeping track, like I said, keeping track in my calendar of when things are due and looking at trends. And then also remembering that for my particular job, the salary is just going to look different for a few months during the year because we're paid out within 9 months. Those, and I still really stay with this whole idea of housing costs not being more than 25%. I just think that's just for me. Not everybody is like that. And with housing increasing so much over these past 5 years, it's more and more difficult for people. Uh, I've just been really lucky that I've been able to continue that, and I'm in the same place I've been for ages. So that 25% just sticks in my head and I can't get rid of it. So So
No,
those
that's
those
a
3
solid
things.
number, right? 25 to 30%. That's a solid number when you're doing mental accounting for sure.
Okay, good. Thank you for that validation. So probably those 3 things in terms of, like, my own personal finances of help me. And then really the last one that I'll say is that moving away a little bit more and more of the scarcity mindset
Mhm.
and just being more willing and able to open myself up to, I'm going to spend this money on a plane ticket. I'm not going to worry if I have to stay over, or if I choose to stay an extra day when I'm out of town and there's going to be this hotel room cost or this Airbnb cost or whatever it is, and just recognizing that I'm still going to be okay because I still have that ridiculously large savings account remaining, and knowing that we're hoping that everything's going to be okay in the end of the month, end of life, whatever it is. And I'm not going to there's not going to be a scarcity for me that way.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you touched on many times just that savings account, or we call it emergency money, right? 3 months bare minimum. A lot of clients have 6 months to a year, depending on where they live, what their profession is, what that looks like. And there is a psychological thing, I think, behind it too, because what's the dollar amount that's going to let you sleep at night without having to worry or have that additional stressor over your head? Like, do I have enough money? I'm spending an extra day on vacation. Am I good? Where is that coming from? What's that kind of safe haven that I have sandbagged behind the scenes as my first line of defense to go to in case things hit the fan?
100%.
Yeah. Well, Terry, thank you so much for spending time and sharing today. I so appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. This was great.
Yeah. And hopefully those of you watching or listening will join us our next Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, Platinum Talks Wealth, please subscribe and share. For more information about Jennifer Rogers Markwell or Platinum Wealth Management, please visit www.platinumwealth.net. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Platinum Wealth Management.